The violent rise and fall of Tony Johnson, better known as White Tony, is a chilling tale of power, betrayal, and a family plagued by tragedy. From his beginnings as a troubled teen to becoming a feared figure in Manchester's underworld, White Tony left a trail of chaos in his wake. Winnie Johnson's life was marked by a series of heartbreaks that most people could never fathom enduring. Her son, Keith Bennett, became one of the tragic figures in the Moors murders when, in 1964, he was abducted at the age of just 12 by the infamous Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Keith was tortured and killed, his body never recovered, leaving Winnie in a relentless state of grief and uncertainty. For decades, she carried the unimaginable weight of not knowing where her child was buried, all while raising her other children and striving to move forward. Yet, fate dealt her another devastating blow, one that reopened her old wounds and added fresh, unbearable layers of pain. 27 years after losing Keith, Winnie was thrust back into the depths of tragedy when her grandson, Tony Johnson, was murdered in a gangland execution. In 1991, at the age of 22, Tony was gunned down in cold blood outside a pub in Cheetham Hill, Manchester. His death, a calculated Chicago-style assassination, was the result of a brutal turf war between rival factions that had engulfed the city in violence. For Winnie, who had already endured more loss than most could imagine, this was yet another cruel twist of fate. Tony had been raised by Winnie in her home in Fallowfield, where memories of Keith lingered in the form of photographs, crucifixes, and his broken spectacles, a makeshift shrine to a son she would never see again. From a young age, Tony seemed like an ordinary, if occasionally troublesome, boy. He left school at 16 and began working as a window cleaner and glazier. But the path his life took was far from ordinary, and the allure of a darker, more dangerous world proved irresistible. As a teenager, Tony became involved with the notorious Cheetham Hill gang, also known as the Hillbillies. This gang operated from the Waterloo estate, carving out their own corner of Manchester's underworld. To distinguish himself from another gang member of the same name, Tony became known as White Tony. It wasn't long before he developed a reputation for his fearlessness and brutal efficiency, earning him respect and notoriety in equal measure. White Tony was not an imposing figure at first glance, but his demeanor and actions spoke volumes. Former gangster and boxer Jason Coughlin would later describe him as someone who, despite his unimposing stature, could demolish even the toughest opponents in violent confrontations. Tony's physical strength was matched only by his willingness to resort to extreme measures, cementing his position as one of the most feared members of the gang. Tony's ascent in the gang was rapid and marked by a series of violent exploits. He was known for his audacious behavior, including allegedly being the first person to bring a gun into Manchester's iconic Hacienda nightclub. On one occasion, he even commandeered a microphone in a nightclub to announce the presence of the Cheetham Hill gang, a brazen display of dominance that exemplified his cockiness and defiance. As his reputation grew, so too did the violence surrounding him. Tony became a prime suspect in several crimes, including the high-profile murder of Anthony "Scratch" Gardner, a member of the rival Moss Side gang. Gardner was killed in a point-blank shotgun execution while sitting in a car in January 1988, but Tony was never convicted for the crime. In March 1990, chaos erupted at the International 2 Club in Longsight during a concert by the controversial rap group 2 Live Crew. The Hillbillies, a notorious gang from Cheetham Hill, arrived uninvited and forced their way past the bouncers. The gang, allegedly led by Tony Johnson, stormed into the venue with a chilling purpose. Once inside, the group of 10 men opened fire, targeting a member of the rival Pepper Hill gang from Moss Side. The victim was shot in the back, leaving the club in a state of panic and cementing the Hillbillies' reputation for ruthless violence. The hostility didn't end there. Just 2 months later, the Hillbillies struck again, this time at the Moss Side Carnival. They located the man they had previously shot and vandalized his BMW, smashing it up in a brazen act of intimidation and retaliation. The feud between the gangs continued to escalate, painting a grim picture of the escalating gang warfare that plagued Manchester at the time. The violence soon extended beyond Manchester's borders. In August of the same year, a double fatal shooting occurred during a West Indian carnival in Leeds. Johnson, who by this point was infamous for his involvement in the city's gang scene, was present at the carnival. Rumors swirled that he had knowledge of the killings, and police arrested him as part of their investigation. Despite being placed in an identity parade, no witness could confidently identify him as being involved in the murders. Johnson vehemently denied any connection to the crime, and for the moment, he escaped legal repercussions. Johnson, known for his audacious behavior, also took precautions as his notoriety grew, often wearing a bulletproof vest to protect himself from inevitable retaliation. However, his criminal activities were not limited to violence. He was also deeply involved in highly lucrative heists. In November 1990, he participated in an armed robbery at Mumps Bridge in Oldham, serving as the getaway driver. The heist was meticulously planned and executed, with gunmen forcing security guards to transport them to a secure location. There, the gang made off with a staggering £362,000, an amount equivalent to over £900,000 today. This daring robbery showcased Johnson's ability to orchestrate high-stakes crimes, but it also marked the beginning of his undoing. Only 4 weeks after the Oldham heist, Johnson was involved in another audacious robbery, this time targeting the Bassett's Sweet Factory in Sheffield. During this raid, 3 gunmen armed with a shotgun pursued armor guard staff through the factory, creating chaos as they fired their weapon. The heist yielded £80,000, a significant sum at the time, but it was not without its mishaps. In their haste to flee, the gang accidentally dropped £205 notes, leaving a trail of evidence behind as they dashed to their getaway car. Eyewitness accounts described the surreal scene as it literally rained fivers during the gang's escape. The aftermath of the robbery led the police to intensify their investigation. A flat in the Crooks area of Sheffield, believed to have been used as a hideout by the gunman, was raided. During the search, law enforcement discovered crucial evidence: fingerprints. At the time, the fingerprints did not immediately lead to any arrests. However, following Johnson's murder, investigators revisited the case, and the fingerprints were matched to him, providing a posthumous link between the infamous gangster and the brazen heists that had rocked the region. Johnson was a well-known figure at the Hacienda nightclub, where his reputation and overconfident demeanor often allowed him to bypass paying for entry. Despite his regular presence, his volatile nature ultimately played a pivotal role in the venue's downfall. On New Year's Eve in 1990, an incident involving Johnson escalated dramatically. He pulled a firearm on doormen from London, an act that left owner Tony Wilson with no choice but to temporarily shut down the club in an effort to reclaim control from the criminal elements that had begun to dominate its atmosphere. However, Johnson's days were numbered. Less than 2 months later, on a cold February night in 1991, his fate was sealed. Alongside an associate, he arranged a late-night meeting with a group of men in the parking lot of the Penny Black pub in Cheetham Hill. The location was quiet and isolated, setting the stage for what would become a deadly confrontation. Arriving in his pristine white Ford Cosworth, valued at £25,000, Johnson appeared confident. The group of men he met with questioned whether he and his associate were armed. Johnson replied firmly in the negative, unaware of the deadly turn the encounter would soon take. Without hesitation, the other group opened fire. A bullet tore through the sleeve of his associate's jacket, narrowly missing him. Panicked, the associate turned to flee but was struck in the back as he ran for his life. Amid the chaos, Johnson's associate heard the deafening sound of additional gunshots. Glancing back, he saw Johnson collapse to the ground. A chilling command pierced the night: finish him. The killers, clearly familiar with Johnson's reputation and the threat he posed, were taking no risks. They fired again, ensuring he wouldn't survive. Of the 4 bullets that hit him, 2 struck his back and 1 tore into his neck. But the final shot was the most brutal. A bullet fired directly into his mouth as he lay helpless on the ground, ending his life in a calculated and merciless fashion. The following morning, the Manchester Evening News plastered the story on its front page under the ominous headline, "Gang Terror in City as Man is Shot Dead." The murder sent shockwaves through the community, and an unnamed detective involved in the investigation offered a grim assessment of Johnson's life and reputation. He was known on the streets as a professional robber and a gang hitman. His presence at the hacienda, often alongside other mobsters, had become notorious. "We are determined to bring those responsible to justice. Gun violence like this cannot be tolerated on the streets of Manchester." As the news broke, Johnson's grandmother, Winnie, was visited by police. They brought her to the hospital mortuary to identify her grandson's body, a devastating reminder of the violent losses her family had endured. Winnie, already carrying the grief of losing her son Keith years earlier, expressed her anguish to the Manchester Evening News. "As if I haven't suffered enough over Keith. I can't believe we're facing another murder in our family. As I stood there identifying his body, all I could think about was losing two sons." By July of the following year, 5 men stood trial for Johnson's murder, among them infamous gangsters Desmond and Damian Noonan. The Noonan brothers were believed to have a stranglehold on Manchester's drug trade and control over the hacienda's doors. Despite the strong suspicions surrounding them, the trial ended without a clear verdict, and a retrial was ordered. In the second trial, Desmond Noonan was prosecuted again, this time alongside 2 others, as the hunt for justice in Johnson's murder continued. During the second trial, the prosecution presented a theory that the murder of Tony Johnson was rooted in a dispute among members of the gang over the division of loot from a robbery in Oldham that had taken place in November 1990. According to police investigations, one member of the gang had entrusted his £80,000 share to another for safekeeping. However, when the time came to retrieve his money, he was reportedly informed by Desmond Noonan that only half of the sum remained. This revelation led to significant tension and anger, with the disgruntled robber allegedly deciding to turn to Johnson for support or intervention. Prosecutors claimed that this situation set a deadly chain of events in motion. Desmond Noonan, aware of the potential consequences, allegedly met with another defendant to devise a plan to eliminate Johnson. In court, it was argued that Desmond Noonan himself was the one to fire the first shot on the night of the murder, initiating the brutal execution. Despite these allegations, the outcome of the second trial failed to deliver the justice Johnson's family had hoped for. While one of the defendants was acquitted, the jury once again could not reach a unanimous verdict regarding Desmond Noonan or another accused individual. Given that this was the second failed attempt to secure a conclusive judgment, Judge Rhys Davies decided that a third trial would not serve the interests of justice. He subsequently entered not guilty verdicts on behalf of the remaining defendants. The 3 accused men had already spent 21 months in custody awaiting trial. Each of them presented alibis during the proceedings to account for their whereabouts at the time of the murder. Desmond Noonan's defense was that he had been drinking in Didsbury when the crime took place. Following the trial's conclusion, one of the acquitted men spoke to the Manchester Evening News, offering a poignant reflection on the events. "Tony Johnson was a man I knew who had a heart of gold and was betrayed to his death by his friends," he stated, highlighting the bitter betrayal that had led to Johnson's demise. Johnson's funeral was a notable event, attended by approximately 200 people, including a 30-vehicle motorcade that escorted his body. The original plans to hold a ceremony in the chapel at Southern Cemetery had to be abandoned due to the large number of attendees. Instead, an open-air service was conducted, allowing his friends and family to say their goodbyes under the sky. In the years that followed, the fates of the Noonan brothers would also take dark and tragic turns. Desmond Noonan, who, along with his brothers, had once boasted of ruling Manchester, met his end in March 2005 at the age of 45. He was stabbed to death in Chorlton by a crack cocaine dealer, marking a violent conclusion to his infamous life. His brother Damian had already died 2 years earlier, in 2003, at the age of 37, following a motorcycle accident in the Dominican Republic. Winnie Johnson, the grandmother who had endured unspeakable loss, passed away in August 2012 at the age of 78 after a long battle with cancer. Tragically, she never found the remains of her son Keith, who had been abducted and murdered years earlier, nor did she see her grandson's killers brought to justice. Her life, marked by resilience and sorrow, ended with unanswered questions and lingering grief.